Is up. Welcome to the Bitcoin Peace and Music podcast. I have somebody very, very special who I got to meet in person at the Miami Bitcoin conference. And he is on a mission with Start9 Labs to help rebuild the internet into an owner operated model. This is Dave Croisant. Thank you. Hi, Dave. How's it going?
I'm great, Valerie. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I see you're wearing one of your many hats. You're the chief communications officer, multitasker extraordinaire. Tell us what you do over at Start9 and what Start9's all about.
Yeah, so start with why Start9 was created. So the story goes, and I have a similar story as to why I joined Start9. So Start9 was originally founded by three guys, Matt, Aiden, and Keegan, who were putting together Lightning nodes for themselves personally, and they came to the conclusion that, hey, this is kind of a difficult thing, and even though we have a lot of technical skill here, this is something that's going to be prohibitive. So the average person is not going to do this. They're not going to get on the command line and input all these commands, understand the output, the errors that they come across, and fix them. And so that's going to really prohibit Lightning Network propagation. And so they set about to create a company that would make this easier, and they stumbled across the fact that, in fact, this was merely a symptom of a larger problem, and that larger problem we'll probably get into a little bit later. But that's the model that the internet works on today, known as the client-server model. Maybe we should save that for a bit later.
Okay.
And I had a similar kind of introduction to Start9, whereas I was building my own Lightning nodes, and I was able to put them together just fine. But after doing so, I was very frustrated with the fact that same thing, like I was able to put this together, but most people are not going to do and go through the struggles that I did in order to make this work. And so I was pretty depressed, to be honest, about Lightning and its future as a result of that.
Let's take a step back for just a sec, just for those listeners who may not know what Lightning is and how it relates to the Bitcoin network and how it supports Bitcoin. Like, what can you explain what Lightning is and why it's so important?
Sure. Yeah. So Bitcoin you can think of as a settlement layer. So this is often equated to gold, right? Digital gold. And the idea here being that this is a way to make final. Currently, it's for basically any kind of payment, but in the future, it is more likely to be for large payments. So using Bitcoin on what's known as the on-chain or base or layer one level is likely to be something that you will do when purchasing a car, land, or other large property, things of that nature. It also is good for if you want to make a public record of something, which you don't mind spending to make a public record. Lightning was created to address the fact that Bitcoin's blockchain is intentionally paced out at a pace that is not really appropriate for everyday payments. Okay, so the Lightning Network was created as a second layer above Bitcoin, so it's tied to the first layer with smart contracts, and these are known. The most popular is known as a hashed time-locked contract, or an HTLC. And there are other ways to do this, and Lightning will probably not be the only network built on top of Bitcoin. It is just the first and most popular currently. So the way to think about it is that Bitcoin is that main chain, that base layer, and above that we have this payments layer, Lightning, which is much cheaper and faster and can process the high levels of transactions per second that are expected when you need to, for example, buy a coffee or something else, some other daily purchase that is of a lower amount that needs to be finalized quicker.
And then how safe is the Lightning network compared to using Bitcoin for transactions?
Yeah, so Lightning is much younger. It kind of came about in the 2016. I want to say the paper was probably written in 2015, somewhere around there. It has been extensively tested across those years. There have been no major attacks to speak of. During those years, several possible attacks have been discovered, and those are being worked through to mitigate and discover different ways to secure the network in a better way than it was originally coded. But this is completely natural for software to evolve, and especially for large networks to evolve. At this point, the battle testing is getting reasonably good. It is not advised to to put a ton of funds on there because two reasons. One, it is still in that beta phase. And two, it's not the place to put lots of funds, right? It's the place that you put your grocery money or your day-to-day use money, things like that. You can think of this of Lightning as the wallet that you carry around when you're going to the store or you're going out and about, and you can think of Bitcoin as your savings account.
Okay.
So you would kind of manage your funds appropriately on that model. So Lightning is a very safe network. There have been no major loss of funds since its inception. However, it is still kind of getting worked through the kinks at this point. I think there are a couple $100 million deployed to the Lightning Network, which is a ton of money. But in the scheme of things, it is a very small amount of money. So we're early still. Even Bitcoin is early still, but it is growing very rapidly. And it's something that I use quite often for payments personally. So it is something that you can definitely use today.
And then it's like Jack Mallers announced a bunch of stuff going on with Strike and all the different payments getting being able to be accepted, where vendors don't have to go, doing like change their hardware for like swiping stuff. So can you help, like how is that going to work now in the future? With like going to Bed Bath and Beyond or any of the other vendors that were mentioned at the conference.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit less familiar with the side of it in regard to the like larger vendors. One thing that I am particularly excited about is that we know that Square, who I think have renamed themselves to Block. This is an organization that you would be familiar with if you've ever used Cash App. Also Square Payments, so the little device previously that you would plug into your headphone jack on your mobile device. They have merchants all over the place, and these are a lot of mom and pop stores where you'll go in and you'll see they'll have a little iPad, and you might swipe your card into that iPad to make your payment. Well, these guys have been working with Lightning for some years now, and it is anticipated that before long, probably in the not too distant future anyway, that they will enable Lightning payments on those payment portals, which would mean that all of those mom and pops and all those small to medium-sized businesses would instantly be able to take Lightning. Now, the guess is that, again, they're following very closely the developments. They're making sure that Lightning Network is ready for that broad adoption, because that would instantly bring online the ability to purchase at millions and millions of locations around the world. And as I said, with the big box stuff, I'm a little bit less familiar, but you can already buy, if you're just looking to make purchases yourself, you can already buy things like gift cards or prepaid debit cards using Bitcoin or Lightning, and take those into the store or spend them digitally however you want. So it's getting to the point now where the only points of friction for people that want to live on a Bitcoin income, for example, would be bill payments. And even those are being slowly solved, even with regard to mortgages. So we're getting to the point that anyone that wants to live on Bitcoin entirely from their income all the way through paying their bills will be able to without much inconvenience. And some people have been doing it for many years with some inconvenience.
Yeah, this is like super exciting. And so how does it work? Like, do I have to get like with are they just using like the rails of Lightning to transfer? Can you, because I think I remember you can transfer just dollar to dollar. It would go dollar to Bitcoin back to dollar if you're trying to, transfer that. So I don't have to actually give you my Bitcoin. I'm just using the Lightning rails to like send. Can you
That
help me understand that a little?
Yeah, that is the model that I believe Strike is using. Again, I'm a
Okay.
little bit less familiar with their model. I've not used it myself, so I can't speak too well to that. But that is my understanding, is that they're using it as a payment network on the back end, essentially as a replacement for the SWIFT network. And
Yeah.
for those that may or may not be familiar, the SWIFT network is an interbank wire service that they use to send money to each other. In the biggest difference is, well, there are several big differences, reasons why their Strike is going with that route, which are that it is basically instantaneous. There's none of this 3-day nonsense that many of us have experienced by sending a wire.
Yeah.
It does not require an intermediary on Strike's end. Now, you are using Strike, so there's still a trusted third party there. And the transaction is much cheaper, both for Strike and for you. I want to say even that they have possibly no fees. Don't quote me on that, but it's either a very low fee or no fee whatsoever to use that system.
And then what about like Block? How is Block going to be doing the same thing? Is it cash? Can we send dollars or fiat, or is it just Bitcoin to Bitcoin using
Yeah,
like,
so their system is not live yet, so we're not really sure what they're going to do. We just
okay.
know we're aware they have hired, and in fact, they're shifting the entire company's focus to Bitcoin, away from just being a payment processor. And the profits that they've gained just from their Bitcoin activity have been substantial. And in addition to that, they've hired several people, obviously, since they're shifting that focus, who are specifically working on Bitcoin and Lightning. And furthermore, they are one of many companies that hires full-time Bitcoin or Lightning developers. And what this means is this is, they have some self-interest here, but it is somewhat of a charitable thing to do, because they're basically paying the full-time wage of a developer who is not working directly on their product, but instead working on the open source protocols of Bitcoin and Lightning, which of course benefits us in the aggregate, the entire community.
And why is open source so important? I mean, I understand why, but for the audience who's listening, and I think that can dovetail into talking about Start9 and what you guys are doing with the rebuilding the internet, and why it's important for our own data, to own our data, and having open source and not these closed door uh, protocols.
Yeah, definitely. So my favorite metaphor for open source is the idea of recipes. So
Mm.
you might, for example, have a recipe. Let's say you have a recipe for a chocolate cake, and maybe your grandma was the first to kind of bring this recipe into the family, however she did so. And it's been passed down through the family. However, the family has openly perhaps shared that recipe with friends and other families, and perhaps even some member of the family might have even created a cookbook that included that recipe and sold that for a profit. So the idea of open source is the same thing, but with code. And what the idea is here is that code to run software is published openly, so that anyone else can edit that. For example, you can add some a little bit more sugar, or maybe you don't want sugar at all, things like that, to that recipe, to edit it to your tastes. And more importantly, with computer code as opposed to recipes, is that since the entire community can look at that code, we, the community in the aggregate, again, can audit that code and make sure that it is secure. This is a lot more secure, assuming that you have enough eyes on it. This is a lot more secure than a company trying to secure their own software and keeping it all a secret, which is what we see with Microsoft and Apple and Google. And often, when there's a security vulnerability there, there's not really much impetus to report that, or at least there hasn't been in the past. They're now starting to pay people through bounty programs. But there's a lot more sort of motivation for the community to look at code that they are using themselves and to give feedback and to look for security issues and things like that. So open source software is, I don't want to say as a rule it is more secure, because you can have some piece of code that no one's ever looked at. But in general, if it is a well-used piece of code, that means there are a lot of eyes on it and a lot of people making contributions to improve it, and keeping an eye on security and things of that nature.
And so with open source, are people, just like you had said, like you can take grandma's chocolate cake recipe and go make a book out of it and go sell the book because it's got a collection of recipes, or, whatever the use case is, or, she's going to take the recipe and start a restaurant and go use grandma's recipe at the restaurant and, charge for some chocolate cake. How does it work with, is everything just by donation? Does everybody volunteer their time for open source development? How does that work? And
Yeah.
also, what's a bounty? Just so people understand what that means too.
Sure. So a bounty is just an idea of, you could think of it like a wanted poster that you would see like in the Wild West, where it would say, wanted, this criminal, bring him in because we think he killed some folks or something. The difference in an open source bounty is what it is typically the producers of the code, whether it's a company or an organization or a community, will say, we are not able to, we've tested this and we believe it to be good. We haven't found any bugs up until this point in our testing, but we need more testing, because testing is this cycle of looking for issues, by testing, finding the issues, fixing the issues, and then releasing an update with those fixes in it is sort of a process that's constantly ongoing. And the more people that are doing it, the more that software will benefit and the more secure that it will be. So the idea of a bounty is that instead of looking for a criminal or something, you're looking for security holes. So a company might say, we will offer, say, $1,000 if you find some bug that affects your use in some way. And we might offer a lot more, say $10,000, if you find a bug that actually would allow for an attacker to steal funds. Say this was a Bitcoin wallet piece of software. If you found something that would be detrimental, such as loss of funds, then we would pay a much higher rate for you to fix that problem. And what this incentivizes is, instead of attackers looking for weaknesses so that they can steal money, they can use that same skill set, but instead look for those problems and responsibly report them to the creators or to the maintainers of that package, so that they can implement the fix, and then no funds are lost and the person is paid for their skill set.
And I've listened to a couple different podcasts about open source development, and it's people are talking like, if you're interested in being a developer, like start working on open source stuff so you can have that on your kind of resume, as it were. Is that something that, like, it just seems so interesting to me to like be like, open and doing all these cool projects. It's just fascinating to me as a, non-coder, non-developer kind of person.
Yeah. So it's actually, you don't actually need to be a developer or know a programming language in order to contribute to open source projects.
Okay.
So there are a lot of ancillary sort of frameworks that are also in need of help. So for example, anytime you have a piece of software, there's typically some kind of documentation or instructions or guides or videos that need to be created so that the users understand how that it works, and so that they can use it in the best way. Mm-hmm. So people might want to write a blog post that explains this is how I use the thing, and this is where it might have had some issues, and that will help the maintainers as well. You might want to translate some of the existing documentation or guides so that people who for whom the language that the guides are presented in is not their primary language. Mm-hmm. Often we're talking about English. If that could be translated into Spanish or some other language, that would help a lot of other people who don't have access to the English language. There are websites that are maintained. You might be clicking around on someone's website and notice, this button didn't work. Well, just reporting that, giving that feedback is helpful as well. So there's endless things that can be done to give back as a community member if you're someone that uses one of these pieces of software, such as a Bitcoin or a Lightning wallet.
Oh, cool. Okay. So normie me can do something valuable, even though I can't write code.
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you might not even, it may not even be contributing back to a project. You might say, I've been using this wallet for a couple of years now, and I really love it. I think this is a great wallet for this, and this reason. You might write a blog post or make a video, or again, a guide, how to set it up with doing this, that, or the other. So all of that is a contribution to open source in general.
And can you? So let's segue into Start9, and how does all of this kind of fit in with what Start9 is up to, and what's the current state of how the internet is operated, and what's the desired future state that is, that you guys are seeking to create?
Yeah, so there's a ton to unpack there. We'll start with where we kind of left off. I said that the original formation of the company was due to the struggles, or the realization that Lightning Network was going to be too difficult to deploy without some kind of easier way to do it, some user intuitive way to use Lightning. So the broader, and let me explain why that's the case first. So many people may have heard the idea of running a Bitcoin node, which is a part of the network that audits. Again, this is when you run a node, you're part of the auditing of, in this case, the money supply, the supply of Bitcoin, and all of the transactions that occur to make sure that they are valid and that nobody is attempting to counterfeit or steal. So in order to run the Lightning Network, that second layer, because it doesn't have its own blockchain, because it relies on the Bitcoin blockchain, the only way to run Lightning as a node is to first have a Bitcoin node that you can install that software on top of. So, uh, so that's the first issue. And the second issue is that ideally Lightning Network is online 24/7, because you might want to make a payment in the middle of the night. You might be having a beer or something. You might need to make a payment at 2 in the morning. You're not going to be running home, turning your computer on, so on and so forth. So Lightning requires a server, is what these are. These nodes are all servers, and they may just be a very tiny computer like a Raspberry Pi. But they do need to be on 24/7 essentially, so they're always there available. So the broader problem is that there are a lot of services that are like this, and we use them every day. So for example, let's use file storage. So a lot of people use Dropbox or Google Drive or iCloud, things of that nature, to store their files, let's say photos in this case, so that they can access them wherever they are from their mobile device, their laptop, so on and so forth. And the problem with this model, and this is called a client-server model, which we're actually not changing, but we're changing the dynamic of the client-server model. So the client-server model means that you have a server, which is the place where your data lives, and these are currently mostly owned by big tech companies. So Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, all these guys, they own all these giant server farms that have tons and tons of data in them. And people are voluntarily giving that data to them and then creating an account for which whenever they go to log in, they're asking permission, essentially. Can I have access to my data, share it with my friends, whatever it is that I want to do with it? And then, so you are the client in that case. The server is serving whatever data it has on it that you've given to it, and the client is requesting or making calls to that server.
Okay.
So the difference, so this is what was realized to be such a big issue, is that not only are we having to depend on servers for the Lightning Network if we're going to use it without building our own, but also for everything else that we do in everyday life, social media, file storage, things of that nature. So what the guys that founded Start9 realized was the thing that the world needs right now is the ability to host services, host servers themselves, but without all of the technical know-how that's required, because it takes years and years to learn how to do all that stuff. And so what they actually created was an operating system, which is based on Linux, that allows you to have the same kind of an interface that you're used to on a mobile device, for example, where you have a marketplace, and you go to that marketplace and you say, I want these services. And a service is different from an app that you're used to on your phone, because it's the server portion, right? So it's sitting waiting for your requests and storing your data and other software that you're using. So it's kind of the same model, except in this case, you own the server. So you would buy a small device which has this operating system on it, or you can build it yourself, because our software is open source, which means it's available for people to download and use. You own this server, which you can put next to your router, and just like your router at home or in your office, you can forget that it exists. And then you use your mobile device or your laptop or your desktop. And instead of reaching out, say if you want to share some photos, instead of reaching out to Google or Apple, you reach out to your own device, which is storing all that stuff. And then you can provide a link or otherwise share that data the way that you want to, without having any intermediary or trusted third party involved.
And then how does it work? So obviously we're in Colorado, there's wildfires, there's snow, there's all this stuff, right? And so I've had to evacuate my house 3 times so far in the last couple of years. And so the idea for me of not having multiple redundant backups that are off-site, that are far, far away from here, and not in a tornado zone or a hurricane zone or whatever, like, how do I make sure that all of my data is redundant and safe? And so it's like, now I have to go back to the trusted part with like a friend or something. How does that work? I know we kind of talked about that a little.
Yeah, definitely. So there are a couple of things to think about here. And let me frame this first by saying that the way that Start9 approaches these problems is that we want to create immediate solutions, what are called in software, often called an MVP, or a minimum viable product.
Okay.
The idea here just being that we want to make a thing that works, as a proof of concept, and then we'll iterate on that and we'll make it better and add features as we go. Um, so that's one point, and we'll come back to that. So, and then the second point here is that when you own your data, you are taking responsibility for it. Okay, so instead of signing a 600-page terms of service and a privacy policy that allows these companies to sell your data, advertise to you, track your purchases, whatever it is, instead of that, you're just making an agreement with yourself, and that agreement is that I will do two things. One is that I will keep backups, and I will keep a strong password, which I will either back up or never forget. Ideally, you want to back that up somewhere, because maybe you get a head injury one day, you need to go find where you wrote that down.
God forbid.
So, so coming back to the example here of what do you do about securing your data physically, since it's now in one place that you control. So our minimum viable here is that we've created the ability to do a backup to another drive that is on your network. Now, so the instant solution might be that you take that drive and you bury it in the mountains if you're here in Colorado, or maybe you bury it in your backyard. Maybe you'd consider that a safe place against fire or flood. You can bury it in like something that's watertight, something of that nature. So this is our minimum viable, right? So this works now with a little bit of inconvenience, but with the great benefit of having total control and not being advertised to, not being tracked, not being spied on, so on and so forth. Now, we think that works and it's great, but it's not good enough. Where we're going in the future is we have, there's a lot of ideas of how this is going to happen, but as we're going to get into here, we want to rebuild the entire internet, and that's kind of a tall order, which is why we're having to do things a little bit at a time. We're starting with servers. But what we eventually want to build is a network that allows embassy users, or perhaps more preferably, it would be an open protocol that anyone that's self-hosting their own software and data could connect to, and they could essentially make micropayments using the Lightning Network, just meaning very tiny payments, maybe on the order of a few cents a month. We really don't know what it would be, but you would pay other users of the network to store encrypted shards of your data, meaning you would take your entire backup of everything on your device, and then the network would split that up into tiny pieces. Well, it encrypt it first. So it would encrypt it with your password so that no one can read any of that data. Then it would break it up into tiny pieces and distribute it to everybody else, so that everybody that's participating in this network would have a tiny piece, or rather lots of tiny pieces of lots of other people's data. And they would be paid for hosting that service, for taking that little bit of their hard drive to do that. And you would be a member of this service as well. So it's possible that some people would have more storage and they would make a little bit of money off of this. And it's possible that other people would need a little bit more storage and therefore would pay a little bit into this. Again, this is something that's not going to be done next week. This is something that's going to take years to build out. But that is what we're headed towards, where we can distribute all of our backups, all of our data that we care about, that we want to keep safe, without having to bury it in the mountains or in the backyard or whatever, and at low cost, and without having to trust these big companies and just giving everything to them, carte blanche.
And so one of the things that I think a lot of us hear the same, oh, privacy, I don't have anything to hide. Who cares? I'm not a criminal, or I'm not, hiding anything. Who cares about my data? And I don't mind if I get an advertisement for, vitamins or something. And so I have 2 children, and that's what I hear from them, because they're teenagers, and like, who cares? It's fine. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a nightmare, like trying to deal with teenagers. Yeah. And, that's kind of my old mindset before I started learning about Bitcoin and privacy and why it's so important to, start having more, sovereignty with my data and my attention and everything. And so with a couple of reasons, obviously, that are important. So, I mean, how can this help with that? I guess my question is, I have so much stuff. Google owns my life right now. You know what I mean? And it's owned my life for, a long, long time, my business part of my life and a lot of my personal stuff. So the fact that they've already got like copies of me and my attention and my habits and my patterns and my family photos from 2004, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and my documents and my journals, it's kind of like, even if I say, screw it, Google, I don't want, I want to de-Google everything and come over and put everything over on my embassy. And how can I trust that they're, going to delete me? You know what I mean? And how does can that work going forward?
Yeah, so there's a few points to touch on there. The first one is this idea of folks that say, "Well, I don't have anything to hide,"
Yeah.
and I hear that a lot as well. And the first thing I ask them for is I get out a pen or I pull my phone out and I say, "Could you just give me the user account and password to your bank account, your social security number, your mother's maiden name?" And usually, after a few examples, they usually start to get the idea that, oh, actually, there are some things that I prefer to keep private. It's not that I have something to hide necessarily. It's that I have these things that are unique to me, right? And this typically is an idea in the physical world that starts at your front door, right? So it wouldn't be acceptable for me to just walk in the front door to your house and just start rummaging around and making myself at home if I'm not actually invited to be there, right?
Right.
And so when your kids, you were talking about, it sounds like they're coming up on the age where they can have a bank account,
Mhm.
and they go to sign up for that. They are creating an account, all of the details of which belong to that bank. So it's not even optional for them to say, "Well, no, I don't want to give you my bank account details," because the bank is providing them those details and holding all of their money, right? So if so there's a couple of reasons why that may not be desirable. For example, some government institution may decide that we need to take a small portion of your bank account in order to solve climate change, or because inflation is bad, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
whatever reason they have, or perhaps the bank becomes insolvent and they're not able to get you any of your funds because their FDIC insurance isn't going to cover enough, or whatever. There's a lot of reasons to maybe not trust all of your savings to a bank account,
Yeah.
which is why Bitcoin came around. Um, and I kind of lost the rest of your point there. We started with the
Well,
nothing to
so
hide.
yeah, I've
Oh,
nothing to hide. So there's nothing
and
to hide, and
yeah,
and it's okay if I get an advertisement once in a while because I like vitamins, right? If
mhm.
I'm on a social media or whatever, and so
Yeah,
that is their one of their other uh, kind of comments that you hear from a lot of people. They're like, "Who cares? I'm already in it. I can't go and
mhm.
do my attention and all that data."
Yeah. So let's think about let's take this example quickly. If we rewind sort of 15 to 20 years when all these tools were starting to come out, we started to realize the benefit of having all these services, whatever they may be. Think about any modern internet service that you use. We realized the benefit immediately, and there was actually a couple of options. We could have actually gone down this path immediately of being responsible for all of our data and hosting everything ourselves, and even our websites belonging to us on our computers. That's actually how the internet started to be built, and there was a lot of creativity there. The problem that was that these companies raised tons and tons of money in order to create these very hyper convenient services. What's like, oh, you don't need to learn how to do that. Excuse me, we'll do it for you, and we'll even provide that service for free. And when a service is free, it typically means that you are the product, and that's
Yeah.
where we get into the advertising, the tracking of your habits, the selling of your metadata. So the places that you visit, the things that you buy, all of that is sold off. That's how these companies make money most of the time. Now, as far as like, well, I don't mind seeing an ad from time to time here and there. Well, that's ads aren't necessarily going to like disappear from this model, right? So I might self-host. I might host a website where I sell vitamins myself. I might host that, and it might be completely voluntary for you to visit my website and buy some vitamins. And there might be on there. I might choose to affiliate with some other vitamin company or water filter company or something, and they might have an advertisement on my site. So it's not that entire model is quote unquote evil, so to speak. It's that the way that the larger companies do it is a little bit more to the evil side,
Mm.
in that they do it indiscriminately for a profit specifically. based on the marketing as opposed to like some kind of an affiliate program or some other benign type of advertisement scheme.
And then so knowing that this is still going to be going on, I just saw a post yesterday too that they're going to start maybe going after Google for their Google ad models, like some news article. I'm like, oh, that we'll see how that. Let's get some popcorn, um, see what's going to happen there. Um, but how does when I started learning again, I'm still pretty new to the whole Bitcoin world. I'm still like a year ish old, and I I'm really getting into privacy. And when I was leaving to go to Miami, I'm like, oh my God, I gotta, you know, do this thing with my phone and I gotta hide. So I just started having panic attacks, because I'm like, what do I do? And so I know it's like everything's layers, everything is step by step. It's not, you can't go do everything all at once and disappear from, the digital realm, right? And I'm forward facing, obviously. And so it's not like I'm going to be like this anonymous human, but how do I start de-Googling my life if I were to go over and start using Embassy and being like more sovereign with my own data in this new internet that you're aiming to build?
Yeah. So as you said, this is a very, again, an iterative process, right? This is something that you do a little bit at a time as you're able. It's not something that you do all at once. So, for example, I'm putting together a presentation which I call digital self-defense, which is
Mm,
basically an idea of all the things that you may want to do if you want to regain some privacy in your life. And I expect that'll be a couple hours, and I consider it an introduction. So that's not to say that you should be overwhelmed and just be like, oh, screw it, throw your hands up, forget about it.
yeah.
What that is to say is that it's something that we're always constantly learning. I'm still constantly learning about how this stuff works and how we can make it better. And the tools are just constantly improving. And I expect that if I ever have kids, we'll be at a point where I can actually introduce them to technology in a way that what I mean to say here is that there will be available the technological tools for them to do all of the things in the digital realm that we do today, but in a more private and secure way. Never a totally private and secure way, but in a very private and secure way. So I think you asked me at one point about what is one thing that people could do today for their privacy and security if they're trying to start that journey. And that
Mhm.
answer is always the same for me. I get asked that a lot, and that's to use a password manager.
Mhm.
There are a lot of ways to do this, but it is the number one thing that you can do for yourself in the digital world. The easiest, most straightforward, the thing that your viewers can do right after this podcast is that they can go and sign up for a third party service such as LastPass or Bitwarden, something along those lines, create an account, store their passwords, and then make sure to get a backup of that you own in case anything should ever happen to the company or their servers or their website.
Mhm.
Um, but that's the number one thing that you can do. And the reason is what those tools do is they allow you to create a large and random password for any account that you create online, whether it's your email account, your account for your embassy, for your Google, if you're using Google, or whatever it is. Any account that you create allows you to create a large, secure, usually longer is better, 18 characters or more, which is not something that's easy to remember unless you're
Mhm.
like making it a sentence with a story or something, which is one strategy. But if you can create a large random password that's very strong and it's unique for every account that you make, and those are all stored in one database that you just need to remember one password for. In fact, I think there's another service called One Pass or One Password. That's the idea behind LastPass is that you only need to remember one password for
Mhm.
the rest of your days. This really simplifies the online experience, and you're not constantly reusing a password, using a weak password like your pet's name or some number with your mom's name or your old address or something. Those things are actually very easy for computers to guess.
Mhm.
So, password manager is my number one recommendation.
And so with the password managers, because that's definitely something I think is super important that I've been using for a long time. Also 2FA within that. And so, because to me, like if I'm the bad guy, if I'm Mr. or Mrs. Black hacker, trying to go get stuff, like my number one target is going to be LastPass. or Bitwarden or any of these places. And so, God forbid they get into that and start, they have access to um, our data that way. Then it's like, oh boy, now what's my next layer? And it's so 2FA. Do you want to explain what 2FA is?
Yeah, and before even mentioning 2FA, there's two things to think about. Just in case what you just said were to discourage anyone from making a password manager
Yeah.
account, one of those companies. First of all, those passwords are we do have to trust that the companies are doing what they say,
Hmm.
but it is considered a good practice, and most likely the top companies in the space are hashing your passwords. That means that they're not actually storing your password, they're storing a hash of it. And a hash is just a unique digital fingerprint that's produced through a cryptographic process. So that means that they can't actually, or at least assuming that they're doing their due diligence, your passwords can't actually be stolen by hacking those companies. Now, point number two about that before 2FA is that you can self host your own password manager. Now, you can do
Oh,
this today without any kind of special know-how with, for example, there's two options that I know of that I would recommend that I've used. One is called KeePass. That's Kee Pass, and another is Bitwarden itself. So rather than creating an account with the company, you just download their software and host it yourself. And that doesn't require any special experience. That's just a computer application that you'd be used to.
oh, cool.
Um, Now, furthermore, take that a step further. We have Bitwarden as a service that you can download on your embassy via that marketplace, where you just go in, you say, you see the marketplace, you say, I want a password manager. So you click on Bitwarden, click install, and then it's there and it's running. And then you can connect all of your other devices, like your phone or your web browser, whatever it is that you're using, so that you have that database of passwords available to you at any time. And furthermore, it's synced across all those devices. So if you're fleeing your home because of a fire, for example, and you leave with your device that has a synced copy of your passwords, then you're good. It doesn't matter if your embassy burns up. Ideally, you kind of want to grab that on your way out the door, but
Yeah.
maybe get the cat or whatever instead. So that's understandable. Um, so that's an option. Now, 2FA. So 2FA stands for two-factor authentication. So it's the number 2FA. And what that means is that you have some secondary requirement to the password. So oftentimes you'll sign up for something, and the company and the account that you're signing up for may want to send you an email or a text message to verify that you have access to either that phone number or that email address that you're signing up with them for. Now, in general, you should not use text messages as a second factor. And there's two very good ways to use two-factor. One is to get a software application on your mobile device, which it's just a little app. The ones that I would recommend would be and OTP if you're on Android, ANDOTP, or Aegis, AEGIS. Those two, and I'm not sure the availability on iOS. Sorry, but there are plenty out there for every platform. And what that little app does is, all it does is when you open it up, there'll be nothing in there. You'll add an account, and through the whatever account that you use, say you're using your Google account, you would go into your Google account, find the settings for two-factor, and it's going to give you a QR code, which you would scan with your app, your two-factor app. And
Hmm.
then that two-factor app will then have a 6-digit code, usually 6 digits, could be more,
Hmm.
which will change there's a little timer there, and it'll change about every 30 seconds or a minute or whatever. And whenever you go to sign in, if you have it set up this way, it'll say, okay, enter your username, your password, and it'll continue to say, okay, you're logged in, but we need your two-factor. And then you'll pull this up, you'll get your current code, whatever that is, for that
Hmm.
30 seconds or that minute, whatever that block is, and enter that code. And what this does is, it means that even if the company is hacked and your password is stolen, your username and password is stolen,
Hmm.
the attacker cannot log in because they don't have that code. They don't have that second factor to plug in there and be able to access your account. So it's a very a very high degree of security that you can add in a very simple way. And I would highly recommend that for things like bank accounts, especially, or anything that's going to have a lot of sensitive information, emails, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I started like using it a while back and I'm like, "Oh, this makes me feel just more solid, more locked down." It takes an extra minute to log in ish, when you're logging into a bunch of different things, but it's worth it if you're going to have that feeling of knowing that like for 30 seconds, that trade-off of your life is important, that you're going to be protecting your accounts and all the things that you want to protect online. So yeah, highly recommend a password manager and a 2FA. And so let's circle back into to Start 9 in Embassy, and how does all this work with um you know, what is going forward? Because I know we talked about like, okay, I want to run a node, and should I get an Embassy just to run a Bitcoin node? And then I'm like, oh, because the way I learned about you guys was I was listening to a Stefan the Livera podcast, and I was listening, and I'm like, ooh, I want to learn more about this. And then I met you in Miami, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun, because I am a total normie. I don't know how to do code. I don't. You said like a line command or something. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So I think I do, but I'm going to pretend I don't. Um, so how does somebody who's, simple and normal like me, adopt this?
Yeah, so we actually have some users who they don't use the Embassy for anything except for Bitwarden. So there are some people
Oh,
who
really?
they buy a device, or they buy a software download, however they choose to do it, and they use that, and they install Bitwarden, and that's all that they want it for. That's fine, because this device belongs to you. So let me briefly explain the device a little bit further.
Sure.
I don't know if I have one laying around here. I feel like I do, but not within reach. But so it's just a small device about the size of a deck of cards. And we are moving to some additional hardware as well for power users and people who are running businesses and things like that. But the personal device that we sell is just a very small device that, like I said, you plug it into your router, and then you plug it into the power. And kind of like your router, you just forget that it's there. And yeah, there you go. Pulled one up for me. So
There
those
you go.
little black boxes on the bottom left and the center bottom there are a Raspberry Pi device, which is the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
And you plug that into the internet, you plug it into the power, and that's it. Then you visit it from your web browser. So you don't actually have to plug in a screen, you don't plug in a keyboard, none of that stuff. You access this thing from your devices that you use every day. So after you plug it in, you visit. It's basically just a website that it's serving only within your local network. And when I say local network, what I mean is the network that is administered by your router, which is typically at home or your office.
Okay.
Only the devices within that network can communicate with each other on that network. Now, you can obviously leave the network to talk to the broader internet, but it's very secure to use anything internal to that network. Okay, so that's how the setup is performed for security reasons. So you would visit the setup page on your website, which is just embassy.local. You just type it into your web browser, visit the page. I think it's 3, maybe 4 steps, just kind of walking you through the setup. Very easy. And after a few minutes, you'll be presented with a page that says, "Welcome to Embassy OS." The device being called Embassy and the software that's running called Embassy OS for operating system. You'll be presented with a welcome screen. It'll say, "Visit the marketplace to install whatever it is that you'd like to install your first service." Now, what that's saying is this device comes with no services on it. So it comes with the operating system, and how you use the device is completely up to you. So a lot of people will be familiar with the experience of going to the phone store, they buy a new phone, they start it up, and it's got 62 apps on it already, some of which you probably want, like you might want a text message application and a phone dialing application, but you may not want a lot of the stuff that's on there. So at Start 9, we believe that what you run on your device is your decision alone. So we don't add any services to it. It comes with the operating system only, and then you add whatever it is that you would like. So you've got up here a version of our marketplace. And this is live at marketplace.start9.com if people want to check out what's available now. I think there's maybe 20 something services on there. And we've got another 10 in development right now, at least. So there's constantly stuff being added.
Nice.
And eventually there'll be hundreds of apps on there, or even thousands potentially, like you see on your phones and your desktops and stuff. So let's say that you wanted to store some photos on here. You could go and look for a file storage program, and
Oh no, you just froze. Did I freeze or did you freeze? Ah, one of us is frozen. Don't be frozen. Uh-oh. Oh, there you are. Hold on. Okay, there you are.
you still with me? Cool.
I'm back. Yeah, are you back? Okay,
Yeah.
so you would go look for a file storage program.
So yeah, so let's say, so right there on the right side of the screen, you see File Browser. So that's the
Mhm.
equivalent of Dropbox or Google Drive or iCloud, for example.
Okay.
So if you wanted to store some files, you would click on that and you would click Install, and then it would ask you to configure the service. You would click Configure. In the case of File Browser, the only configuration is if you want to set a password different than the default one that it gives you. And the default one is a random, long, and strong password, which you can store in your password manager. And if you're content with that, you just click Save and click Start, and the thing is running and it's ready to put files on, just like that. So within 5 or 10 minutes of plugging this device in, you're running your own Google Cloud already, as far as file storage is concerned. Now you can keep adding other things to that. You might want to run a Bitcoin node. You might want to run a Lightning node. You might want to have a program that's specifically for your photos, such as PhotoView, which is also there on the right. That would be the equivalent of Google Photos. So that would be a nice gallery. And what it actually does is it actually is reading from your file browser. So your file browser, you might put say you put a folder in there called barbecue, and it's got all of your pictures from your barbecue on July 4th or whatever it was. You open up PhotoView, you click the barbecue folder, just like Google Photos, there's all the photos, and then you can create share links to share them with friends, things like that.
And then how does this work with like, I'm an iPhone user. So if I'm taking some pictures with my iPhone, obviously now Apple has all that. Is this something that I would like if I want to be like ultra private? Am I just not using my phones for any docs or any kind of pictures? And I'm going to go take a picture with like a, what do you call it, like an SD card, and I'm going to plug it in somehow and get everything from there to the embassy.
Yeah, so there's a few ways to go about that. If you don't want to share anything with Apple anymore, then you would need to turn off iCloud, or in other words, cease your iCloud from syncing from
Okay.
your device. Now, you may wish to continue using iCloud, especially when you first start doing self-hosting, because you want to make sure that you understand and you get used to the process and how it works. So you could actually use both simultaneously if you want to, and know that you've got that backup with Apple if you should need it. And then after you get used to the idea of, oh, okay, I'm storing these here, and I've created a backup, and I feel secure in the way that I've done this, or perhaps we get to the point where we start releasing those nice encrypted cloud backups across the network. Then you might be able to just say, okay, I no longer require iCloud in my life anymore, and you can cancel that service. And again, when we start getting a few years down the road here, where those where you can pay for these services amongst other users of the network without requiring a third-party company, you're talking about a much cheaper solution. Whereas the prices for the products that they sell, such as iCloud, you might be paying $2-3 a month today for, say, a terabyte of storage or whatever. These devices come with 1 to 2 terabytes of storage by default. So that's a one-time upfront payment, and then you don't have to pay any more monthly fees ever again. So this is actually going to be cheaper, and that's why in the long run, even people that don't care anything about the principles that we stand on will probably move to a model like this, whether it's our device or something similar, because it's going to be cheaper. And because when you're paying directly to other users of the network, because we all have computers with a little bit of extra hard drive space, when you're all sharing that space in a private and secure way where no one can actually touch any of your data or look at it, then you're talking about a model that's much cheaper, much more efficient.
And where does Start Nine come from? Where's that? Where's the name come from? And yeah,
Yes, that's a slightly long story, but the gist is that there was an ability for there was on Twitch. There's this, which is a streaming service, kind of similar to the one that we're chatting on now, where someone had put up a game of Pokemon where you could collaboratively play. So basically, players would enter in the command that they want, so such as move up or move right or whatever it was, action button, whatever. They would enter that into the chat, and that would execute in the game. Now, as this evolved, there became basically two modes of play. One was basically came to be known as democracy mode, where votes would be input by the users, and then the top-rated command would get executed. And then there was like an anarchy mode, where just all commands were executed in order, regardless of what they were. Now, as you can imagine, the first model, the democracy model, would have been a little bit slower, but a little bit more thought out. And then anarchy mode was happening instantly, but it was a little bit more chaotic. And so what would happen is it would shift towards democracy mode. But when that happened, groups would be able to collude to where they could kind of influence the game politically by making alliances, or I'll trade this vote for that vote or whatever. And so the individual users of the game would start to feel like their voice wasn't being heard in that mode. And so what they would do is they would enter start and then 9, start being the command to pull up the menu screen in the game, as opposed to actually making a move, and 9 being the maximum number of times that you can enter a command. So it would open the menu screen 9 times. And if so basically, if this collusion was occurring in democracy mode and people recognize this, they would start as individuals entering start 9, start 9, start 9. And start 9, if it became the dominant, the voted in essentially call to the game, would mean that the game would open the screen 9 times and it would kind of halt play. So what this was a battle cry for people to say, our voice is not being heard in this system, and we're going back to chaos until we can kind of organize back the way that we want to play, and get out these groups that are colluding to kind of do the thing the way that they want to. So it was a way for individuals in the game to combat the elite group, the elitist kind of groups that were forming and colluding to influence the game.
Okay. I love this. And how can we use this in our current political system that's happening? Because doesn't it feel like there are these like little micro groups of the elite that are controlling things, and they're not listening to our voices, and we really don't have a real democracy, and it's a nightmare. I mean, just on in our country and certainly in the world. Is there any way that we could we use this tactic to get more fairness in the way that we run things in the world? I know this is a little weird segue, but it's fascinating to me.
Totally. I'm happy to go down this route. I mean, essentially, that's something that we can do every day, right? So if we think about these groups that are colluding to influence global politics and finance and things to their benefit, the important thing to remember, especially when you start going down these rabbit holes and you realize what's happening in the world, it can get very depressing, and you can feel very small and like you have no power. If I don't have billions of dollars, or if I don't own a Congress critter, then what can I really do? The important thing to remember is that these groups are tiny in comparison to the global population. I mean, we're talking about think tanks with thousands of members at the most, and then political parties or political institutions with typically hundreds of members, maybe thousands of members. So you're talking about tens of thousands, probably at the top end, of people that are actually colluding to do harm to the global populace for their benefit. Whether they believe that they're doing that harm or not, it's just a fact of the matter. And so the first thing to think about when you start getting depressed about those situations is there are not very many of them. Those tens of thousands are a pittance in comparison to the billions of us that are now connected online with this global communication system. Now, they obviously recognize this, and so what's the first thing that they want to attack? Our communication system.
Yeah.
Any kind of resistance to such things, or any kind of organization that would create an alternative system, which is the preferred route, right? Rather than violence, we want to just create something better.
Yeah.
And they're welcome too. As soon as they realize that this centralized system is not going to work, they are more than welcome to abandon it and come and join us and help build. But kind of got derailed there. But yeah, our daily choices are that battle cry, are that start 9 call where we're throwing a wrench in things. And that might just mean that you don't spend your money with certain companies when they act in a certain political way, or you do spend your money, perhaps more importantly, with smaller companies that are aligned with your principles. Or you start taking control of things that previously you had given up control in exchange for some convenience, some benefits and privileges, if you will. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's say that we start facing some horrible looking supply chain problems with our food supply. So the convenience that we've accepted is the ability to go down to the store and purchase all of our food for the month or the week or whatever it is, at the convenience of not having to really do anything to produce that food.
Right.
Well, maybe it's time to put a couple seeds in the ground if you have that ability. Even if you're in a small apartment, you can start plants inside, and so maybe you take back just a little bit of that food production to yourself. And so maybe you grow some tomatoes in your small apartment, and maybe you've got a friend that has a larger farm. Or has some property where they have grown some more food, and you can trade them maybe some of your skill set or some other product that you produce, or some other value that you have, and some tomatoes for some corn and some or bread or whatever it is that they produce. So there's no reason that anything that is done in a centralized way, meaning in a pyramidal type structure where everything's
Mm-hmm.
coming from one place and then being distributed. There's no reason that we can't do that in a more distributed way, where sort of everybody has something of value, and then they trade amongst each other. And the internet, and now that we have distributed finance with Bitcoin and Lightning, that allows us to now have that trade in a much more free way as well. So there's solutions to all those problems.
Yeah, this is so exciting. Like every day, my brain, I told you before we hit go live, that I was off the grid for the last week, and it was just like, okay, this is good. I'm going to go assimilate all the stuff I just learned this last year and get my body reset. And now I'm like, okay, I'm so excited to just jump back in and start learning again. But I mean, it's just there's this never ending, the rabbit holes of all the different things, and it's helping me. Like Bitcoin has definitely helped me become. I thought that I was a global citizen, and I thought that I kind of had a clue about how things worked, and it helped. I continue to realize how much I don't know, and then I keep learning more, and I'm like, oh wow, I got to go learn about this over here, and just uh, you know, it's just a fascinating road to self-empowerment and self-responsibility, you know, uh, in my life and as a mom and as a citizen here in the world. And I just feel like I'm just so grateful to keep learning and being a part of this community, because it's everybody in this community that I keep meeting, it's like super smart, super kind, super generous, super caring about the world and about making and leaving the world better than we found it. And it's just like we all do have great skills and micro skills that we can contribute, on in our families and the communities and at scale, and it's really reminding ourselves like we can make a difference doing these small things. It's like we don't have to go solve the global hunger crisis all by ourselves, or we don't have to go solve the global financial system all by ourselves. It's like it takes all of us putting our efforts together and uniting. It's powerful. How it like what's your back, we didn't really get into your background. Like what's tell me a little bit more about your backstory and how did you come about like with Start 9?
Yeah. So the place that I like to start is that I was fortunate to have reasonably early access to the internet in my life. I don't know where I fit in percentage wise, but when the internet was being rolled out to the general public after it started to leave the sort of military and collegiate industrial complexes and become distributed to the populace, I had relatively early access to that. And I was in my teens at that time. And I was given this tool and no one knew anything about it really. So basically I was just given free reign. I was, here's the internet connection. I knew that I could do things like send a message to my friend that was at a distant place, or, well, at that time I didn't even have any friends that had it. So there was no, I had to go out and I literally was going out and finding people that I didn't know. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know anything about them. Didn't know what they looked like, but they had these internet personalities. And then these, web pages started turning up, and then you could see things by topic. And there was forums and bulletin boards and things like this. And I was always drawn to the deepest corners, the little dusty, like dark places that didn't, they only had a few people in them, and it was the strangest ideas, and it was things I just never heard of. Nobody had said, ever told me anything about when I was a kid. And the one that really drew my most interest was this idea of anarchy, and this idea that I could not process it at the time. I was in my young teens, and the idea didn't process with me, but it sat with me. That seed was planted to where when I was then in my 20s and I kind of revisited this idea after I started seeing some of the problems that were being created by governments around the world, I started to revisit this idea of anarchy and realized that it was, there was a couple things to it. One is the natural state of things. It's the natural order. And two, that it's kind of the only way to go about things. If we start with the presumption that any of us has any authority to influence the life of another against their will, then that is a non sequitur. We cannot continue from that point and expect a positive result. We cannot expect freedom from that point of view. And it doesn't matter how many of us get together and have a vote that one other person has authority over the will of another. That does not make it right. And so I've come from the principles of anarchy and alongside the passion for technology into the modern day. I've realized that technology is a neutral tool that can be used for goodwill or ill will, and that I've chosen that I want to help maintain freedom on these platforms so that we can use them going forward to help build a better species, as opposed to using them for personal gain at the expense of others. So that's kind of my story up until building my own Lightning nodes, after obviously finding out about Bitcoin and really getting interested in that as one of the first, really the first way. And to be clear to anyone that doesn't know about this history of Bitcoin, the idea of distributing the production and maintenance of money is an idea that goes back decades and decades, about as old as the internet, probably, maybe even more, in the eyes of, or in the minds of writers and dreamers and things like that. But this idea that we could distribute money has been worked on for decades before Bitcoin existed. And all of that groundwork, these different tools, were required for Bitcoin to ever be invented. So this idea of putting things into a globally distributed database like a blockchain had already been created. This idea of mining had already loosely been worked through. And it was when this individual or group called Satoshi Nakamoto put all these things together that we were able to have Bitcoin. And for the first time, a distributed money system that worked in its entirety as a settlement layer. And now we're building these more advanced tools for finance and loans and all these different things that we want to use money for. And so I started building these Lightning nodes, and again, realizing these are too difficult for common folks to have any interest in building, and we need a solution. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, have you heard about Start9?" And I was like, "No," checked them out, and I was like, "Well, this looks pretty cool. This is looks like a really simple way to do all these things." And I didn't necessarily need their product myself because I knew how to do it all. However, I called them up and I was like, "Do you guys need help?" And they said, "No." So I said, okay. And a couple of months went by, and I called them again. I was like, I see you guys are kind of growing a little bit. Do you need help now? And they were like, oh, okay, let's chat. And had a few interviews, and then luckily got hired. And they were looking for someone that was more on the community side, so that I could help translate what it was that they were doing in a technical capacity to everyone else, so that everyone else could get educated on what's happening, what has been happening, what the solutions are, where Start9 fits into that. And I couldn't be happier to be working with the team that I am. They're some of the best people that I've ever met. And I have complete free reign as far as like teaching these tools, whether or not they actually are making any money for the company whatsoever. Like, I can have these conversations and I can give these presentations and workshops where I'm helping people to use tools that are freedom oriented, that benefit us all, whether or not anyone ever buys a device from the company.
I love it. That's and so I love hearing your backstory about the, being intrigued with anarchy. Like, did you have anything in your past that, you felt like I'm oppressed, or like, did you have any kind of turning point that you were just like, I'm going to stand for freedom? And is there anything in your life that happened that
Uh, Yeah, totally. So I grew up in a military family, so I was kind
mm,
of the opposite. And I, when I became old enough to vote, I thought that that was my civic duty to do. And I went out there and I voted for George Bush. And I said, we need to go to Iraq and free the people in Iraq. And looking back, that was a complete 180 from the philosophical beliefs that I hold now and the understanding that I have about why that is, why it's nonsense for me to even believe that those are my decisions to make, why it's nonsense for one man to be in a position of power over 300 million people, and
mm,
even worse, that a small group of people can decide to use military violence to impose their political system on a place halfway around the world. So I came from the complete opposite of where I am now. I experienced that entire side. I could argue their points all day because I lived it. I was very involved politically with those kind of movements and things like that. And again, I derailed a little bit from your original question. So I grew up with those principles in the opposite of rigid control and the idea of following orders from above and things of that nature. So I understood the problems with that and the traumas that caused me and things of that nature. And the turning point, that's what to bring it back to the point, that's what you asked about, was the turning point for me was 9/11.
mm,
So seeing, witnessing that as, again, when I was in the heat of that belief, the immediate response or reaction, rather, is not a response, it was a reaction, was that, revenge is the required action here. Someone has done us harm, and we need to therefore do them harm. And if we continue down that path, what we realize is that that's an infinite cycle. You're just going to
yeah,
do harm to each other forever, because when you react and you attack someone else, then they are going to react and attack you, or their children are going to attack you, so on and so forth. So I started to realize that there was a big problem in this in that idea, combined with all the lies around the events of that day, and all the lives that were lost as a result of those lies. So realizing that there was this big facade pulled over our eyes as to the way things actually work in the world, as opposed to what we're presented through, namely through the media, was really the big eye opener and the big shift for me, that moved me, sort of diametrically opposed me from where I was into learning about those philosophies that I had first had the seed planted years and years before.
and how has so it sounds like your family was military, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how is your relationship now with them, with your newfound, ideology and philosophy of living?
Yeah, it was very difficult. There was a period of time where I had little to no communication whatsoever with most of my family.
Mm,
I did have a sister that was very understanding of she was just willing to listen. She didn't necessarily believe anything that I do, and in some cases that remains today. But she's always been there, willing to listen to me. So that's always been a big part of my life, is having her there. But yeah, it was difficult for a time because the communication completely broke down. It started with endless fights and arguments, and then it moved to just I didn't want to be in their lives as a result of this, because we couldn't have we couldn't sit down for a meal and have a civil conversation without something going awry. And a lot of that was me, and the nature of that rebellion that I was kind of, acting out. But luckily that, I started to subside a little bit. I started to learn a little bit more about that I needed to be empathetic, and to have, to tone it down to where I could hold my principles, and have a more productive relationship with people who even don't agree with me whatsoever and have no interest in listening to what I have to say, let alone changing their mind on certain things. But yeah, those relationships have all improved, I'm happy to say, and there is at least common respect for the way that I think and the principles that I hold, whether or not they choose to agree with or implement those principles in their lives.
I'm glad to hear that, and I can imagine it must have been very difficult. I can relate to having a family that doesn't align with how I think and what my life choices are and how I view the world. And it is very difficult, and it's alienating, and it's one of those like, well, this is my truth and I believe in this, and I know that for me this is right, and I want to live this way. I think one of the things too in learning about Bitcoin and learning about the world more so, I have to watch myself and how I communicate with people even now who are old school, traditional finance. My ex-husband, for example, like love him. He's, a dear friend. We're obviously co-parenting our kids, but, talking about Bitcoin, talking about an alternative finance system, talking about something new is like alien talk. It's like, what do you mean? And so it's like, I have to be more thoughtful in how to communicate, making sure that I know my talking points, or if I don't, like where to refer, so that it's not just like, yeah, this is so great. Woohoo, we found the holy grail for everybody. Right. And so I think that's something, it's important to learn how to be a, a, a thoughtful, healthy, mindful communicator, when you're dealing with a lot of different, audience members, and what we're trying to communicate. So it's an ongoing process on many levels. Right. And you're the communications chief at Start Nine, right? What are you guys, what do you have up your sleeves? What's down the pipeline? What can we expect? And what can, I want to get an embassy. I want to start unpacking how to start being more sovereign with my data. And so, yeah, so just, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. So you asked what we have up our sleeve. We have quite a bit up our sleeve. We move very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We have the engineers on our team are impeccably good. They are very high order. They come from a background where they learned very deeply the technologies required, the programming languages that will work best, and the protocols that we use today, and the protocols that could be used in the future. So when we talk about we want to rebuild the internet, right, and we want this owner-operated model. So if we look at this grand plan, this is very ambitious, right, because the internet is it's huge. It's very well established. There's still a lot of people that it doesn't reach. Billions and billions of people still don't have a connection. And maybe some of them don't want a connection, and that's fine as well. But in order to change this model, which is already now so entrenched over the last 10, 20 years, that's a huge path, right? And we're a very small team, and we're just getting started. So when we're looking at this huge problem, we got to break it down, like I was talking about, building that minimal proof of concept. So when we break this down, if we want to rebuild the internet, what's the first thing we do? And the first thing we do is that we regain control of our data. And when I say we're rebuilding the internet, I don't mean this company. I mean we, the people, because this
Hmm.
is we own this, right? The same way that you may want to start growing some food or start using Bitcoin or whatever. You're going to participate in this global network where you have responsibility over yourself. So we are going to rebuild the internet, whether or not Start9 even exists as a company in the future, whether they survive the process or more ideally, we make ourselves obsolete and then we move into service. For example, customer service is extremely important to us. So we start with regaining control of our data. In order to regain control of our data, we need to run servers. Okay, so that's why we started with this idea of the personal server. And a metaphor that I like to make in a comparison that will maybe help cement this idea of what's happening right now, because it seems very like up in the clouds and etheric right now. So we used to have decades and decades ago a computer that was as powerful as this little guy, would take up an entire room. It lived at university usually, and in order to use it, you had to go physically. You had to show up at the building, which took up most of the building. You typically were in the military, so you typically had to have security clearances and things of this nature. So even then, when they finally get you in the door, what you're probably doing is calculating ICBM routes so that you can decide the fastest way to nuke somebody else. So that's how all of this got started. Well, what do we have now? We have these little devices. Oh, they cost tens of millions of dollars, by the way, hundreds of millions in today's dollars. And these devices are, in many cases, you could get them for free if you're willing to deal with an older device. But even if you get a brand new device, say a laptop, you're looking at a couple $1,000s on the high end for a high-end device, brand new. So that was called the personal computer revolution. That was the bringing the gigantic machines that only the military had access to into the home, where everyone was able to have access to high-speed compute, where they can do whatever it is they want to do. And that typically started off with word processing and email, and then it grew into social media and other applications. So we have a similar situation today with servers, where you have these very large data centers, cost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. They're typically measured, actually, when they're building, they're typically measured per megawatt of power that they're going to use, because that's the constraint. They have to actually have the power available or create their own power enough to run themselves. So they have these giant buildings full of computers. They serve tens of thousands of users, maybe more. And everything lives there, and they belong to these big tech companies, typically in conjunction in that they have corporate or contracts with the government. So I call these entities GovCorp, because really government and corporations have essentially merged entirely at this point. So they own these data centers, which is where all our data lives, where all the servers are. So we're doing the same thing. We're starting the personal computer revolution. And this has been thought about for a long time. There are a lot of companies that do something kind of similar. But we are the first to build a general purpose operating system that is easy to use for anyone. Like I said, it's as easy to use essentially as a mobile device, where you have a service marketplace, install what you want, and it's ready for you to use. So this is the personal server revolution. But that's only step one, right? So the next step, the next logical step, is that once we own our data, we're still relying on the series of tubes, as it were, the internet service providers that connect all of our homes and our offices and schools and libraries and so on and so forth. We're still depending on them for the connections. So there's no reason that they couldn't turn those connections off if they wanted to, or more likely if they were commanded to by a government institution.
Right.
Or if some particular individual was targeted, or some particular political group was targeted, which might be a lot of individuals. So that's the next step, is to how do we have these servers talk to each other so that we don't need to rely on those third parties anymore. And so the next logical step, which we will be, we've already kind of started preliminary research into, but we'll be really diving on research later in the year, is a router. And the ideal situation here is actually a router and a server combined. So you have one box, sits on the shelf, and that is your connection to everyone else, as well as all of your data stored there. And of course, we'll work on the backup solutions as well, so that you don't have to depend on that one box not burning down in a fire or flood or whatever. So yeah, that's the next step, is the routers. And because routers can talk to each other, that means you have your local network that I was talking about earlier. That's called a LAN, or LAN, local area network. Excuse me. So once we have a router with a local area network that can talk to other routers with other local area networks, then we can have an owner operated, meaning that the owners operate the network. And that doesn't mean you have to have a lot of technical skill. It means that you're just a participant. And then the sort of next trick up our sleeve would be all of these modern conveniences that typically require some cloud service. So, for example, people enjoy having a smart speaker like an Alexa or something like that, where they can speak a command to a quote unquote AI, not really intelligence, but to a program that would understand your speech, can speak with you to understand the commands that it's taking. But instead of delivering all of that recorded data, it's essentially a wiretap. Instead of delivering all of that to Amazon, it just stays within your local network because you own everything that happens in your home. There's no reason for that information to leave your home. So we can have all these modern conveniences like home automation with lighting, or HVAC systems so that you can adjust your heating and cooling so that you can have additional efficiencies, security systems, all of which only store their data on your server and any server that you choose to share that with if you choose to do so. And you can access that remotely by you can access your local network from a device you own somewhere else. So we can have all those modern conveniences and those fun, cool toys and things like that without all of the downsides of giving up all of the control of that to a third-party company.
Yeah, the whole surveillance thing with like the Alexa and Siri and what is it, the Ring and
Yeah.
all that, or Nest. I'm just like, I don't want. It's just here you go. You just watch my every single move. I'm home. I'm not home. I'm this. It just feels really, again, like it's marketed as this. Oh, look at all your great conveniences, but really, we're tracking every single thing that you're doing. And like you said earlier, it's like all our metadata is getting sold without our really understanding how that's working and how that could be impacting us, and all these ways. So it's definitely going to take some time to get, this is all just coming online and people are excited about it now. It's like, no, just cancel, clear. Let's go do this instead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm excited. I mean, I think it's a really great company. I love what you guys are up to. I really want to, keep diving in and learning more about it and supporting what you're doing. Um, are there any other things you think that we should share and talk about with the audience that would help them, become sovereign data individuals and, getting ready for the next round of our lives here on planet Earth?
Oh man, that's a tall.
Digital life. Let's just say digital. I know there's a lot more we can go unpack here with that, but
Yeah, I mean, again, I would like to reiterate, that that companies like Start9, and this is about to be a gigantic industry, as you could imagine. This idea of personal servers and an owner-operated internet. There are going to be lots of other companies and individuals that are creating tools for this kind of environment. As we as a species start to realize that this is in the long term a much better way of having a global network like this. So this kind of whole industry is probably on the verge of really exploding into something that becomes like Bitcoin has in the past few years, something that's really starting to seep into the global mindset as a way of doing things. There will probably be resistance, especially from those big players that will likely refuse to be a part of that, and instead will fight back. And we'll see. That'll be an interesting thing. But again, what I wanted to reiterate is that this is a step-by-step thing. You do what you need to do where you are in life at your own pace to improve your personal situation for you and those that are around you that you care about, and your community, because everything that's going to happen in a sustainable way will happen at the local level. And that starts with yourself. and looking at yourself and what you've done in the past and how you would like to perhaps change that, what you would like for yourself now, and what you need to do now in order to create a better future for yourself and perhaps the next generation. So all of this work is done by these individuals for the good of the whole. But that's where it starts. It starts with you. Starts with where you're at, with what you have the ability to do, what you can make the time for, so on and so forth.
Yay. I love it. Ooh, this is a fun journey to be on, my friend.
Yeah.
Um, well, hopefully, am I going to get to see you this weekend? Are you going to be down? It's Bitcoin Pizza Day this weekend. I'm so excited. It's been my first one to learn and play, and I don't know, just hang out with everybody. Um, you want to tell everybody what Bitcoin Pizza Day is?
Yeah, so Bitcoin Pizza Day is a kind of a fun little holiday that Bitcoiners celebrate. The name comes from many years ago, I think 2011. Uh, Bitcoin was being used by this group of folks that kind of understood the kind of concepts behind it, and these were people that, like I said, were working on the tools that led up to Bitcoin. So they were trying to play with this thing, and sitting there saying, "Oh, this actually seems like it's working," you know. And but there was a thing that hadn't happened yet, and that is that no one had used Bitcoin as money. So they were running this global monetary system amongst themselves, but no one had ever bought anything. Well, that's the whole point of making the money, right? So one guy who was an early adopter, he put a call out there on a message board, and he said, I want some pizza, and I want to pay Bitcoin for this pizza, okay? Because I've been using Bitcoin, I've been helping to build this network, and I've got this Bitcoin, but like it has no value unless I can actually buy a pizza with it. And so he put out the call, who wants to buy me a pizza? And this guy was in Florida, I believe. And he put out the call, and the answer came from all the way across the pond, a guy in England who said, I would be willing to exchange you some pizza for the Bitcoin that you have. And they settled on that the guy would get two pizzas in exchange for 10,000 Bitcoin, which
Oh my God, dude.
today is obscene. That is millions and millions of dollars.
Oh
But
my
at the time,
God.
there was no price for Bitcoin, right? This was just a group of volunteers who were passionate about the idea of creating this system that had been experimenting, and they were like, okay, this thing works. Now it needs to be introduced in the fashion that it was built for. And so the exchange happened. He paid 10,000 Bitcoin to this guy. The guy made an international phone call, of course, to Florida, to the local pizza joint there. And he said, I need to pay with a credit card or whatever it was that he did. I would assume a credit card to get these two pizzas delivered to this guy. And this was the first purchase of a real world good for Bitcoin. And so the price of Bitcoin, now the quote unquote price, the value had been set. And so at that time, it was a very low value. It was 5,000 Bitcoin per pizza,
Oh
whatever
my
that works
God.
out to, pennies now. But obviously, because more people are using Bitcoin today, and because they're exchanging it for goods and services, we've now come to a point where the realized value, at least in comparison to the legacy system, usually the U.S. dollar or whatever your current government currency is obviously much higher than that, because there's a limited supply. But Bitcoin Pizza Day is this idea of celebrating the first time that Bitcoin became the thing that it was intended to be and was proven. This was the proof of concept, right? Like we've been talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The proof of concept was that I can get a couple of pizzas for my Bitcoin, and now you can go and get basically anything with your Bitcoin, and it's much easier to do. You don't have to get someone to agree from another country and all of that. So yeah, that's what we'll be celebrating this weekend.
It's pretty exciting. I mean, what a neat time to be alive, right? Like you think about 100 years or 500 years from now. I mean, who knows what the heck's going to be happening? We're just going to like transmit stuff telepathically. But yeah, I'm excited. So, woohoo. We'll rock and roll. Well, we're going to have Bitcoin Pizza Day this weekend, and hopefully not In a blizzard. Is there snow where you're at?
There is some snow. It's not sticking, and it's predicted to snow here a few inches and then go directly back to being 80 degrees. I think that's pretty typical Colorado. So
Yeah, go Colorado. Gotta love it. Well, cool. Well, so for all of you guys listening that you can't see the screens here, you can find Dave Croissant at start9.com, or you guys can go over and follow Start9 Labs at Start9, the number 9 Labs. And yeah, this is going to be great. I'm so excited. Anything else you want to, last words, parting words for the world here?
uh, no real words of wisdom, but I do really appreciate you having me on, and appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to seeing you this weekend, and maybe we can chat again in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And I'm so excited for what you guys are up to, and anything I can do to support and get the word out, let me know. I know I'm like small potatoes. I'm not like Peter McCormick or Natalie, but we all got to do our little parts, right? Like you said.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is the words of wisdom to close out on, right? Is that we all, excuse me, we all have value, whatever that is. If you are at a point in your life, and I've been there, I've been down in the depths of depression and whatnot. So I understand the feeling of feeling like you don't have any worth and you don't have anything to add, and that maybe you feel like everything's stacked against you, or that things are never going to change no matter what you do. All I can say is that that's not true. And when you take whatever tiny little step it is from wherever you are towards some grand goal, and you should aim big, whatever it is that you're looking for in life, or to help change in the world, to take those little steps just a little bit at a time, you'll be surprised how quickly they start to add up, and how much that'll help you change your mindset, and realize and learn what your actual value is, because everybody's got it.
Oh, wow. Those are such powerful words. I'm so glad. And you're so right. It's funny. I'm like kind of hippie mystic woman, and I pull little weird, affirmation cards and stuff every morning, and one of the cards this morning was about, one small step is all you need. Like
Mm-hmm.
just start with a step. And it is really true. And I can relate too. I've been in the depths of depression, and the depths of feeling hopeless and powerless, and it's lonely, and you feel like nobody else has ever gone through this, and it's like, yeah, lots of us have, and we're not alone, so let's rock this new world together with our fun soul tribe of Bitcoiners, and world changers and love warriors. Woohoo. Yay. So, and for anybody else who wants to go out and get lots of great Bitcoin resources, you can go to bitcoin-resources.com. Gigi put this great website together, and it's got lots of just curated content and things if you want to go learn about Bitcoin out there. And, for everybody else listening, you can go to bitcoinpeaceandmusic.com. I got a playlist for you there. And, follow us at BTC Peace Music on Twitter and all the other social media channels. And yeah, and that's it. And yeah, thank you, Dave Croissant from Start9 Labs, for coming and joining us here at Bitcoin Peace and Music. And how about everybody? Let's just take a big inhale together. And remember, you are powerful beyond measure. And let's rock this next part together. So thanks again, Dave, for being with us on Bitcoin Peace and Music. And I'm DJ Valerie V Love, and we'll see you guys next time. Woohoo!
Thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Peace, love, and aloha, everybody.